So we know that, speaking about change, the pandemic led a lot of changes to continue that were already started in America. Church attendance has declined. The pandemic tended to accelerate that. At the same time, we've seen that our online attendance has grown. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know some Sundays we get as many as 50 to 75 attendees online. We don't know who all of those individuals are, and that's a task we need to figure out how to figure out, because YouTube doesn't necessarily make that easy. But that includes our parish, and we shouldn't forget that as well. And I definitely want to underline that. Those individuals who either for one reason can't come, or who may be as far away as half the world away, who are attending. So, yep, go ahead. So we made a decision to, as a result of our discussions for who we are, we made a decision that we would go into 4 Sunday services, 3 of which include music, and those music traditions are different in each service. Go ahead. We have a robust online worship community. We have brought back adult forums and adult education opportunities. And we are rebuilding the Children, Youth, and Families program. We have about 110 children registered at this moment. Far less than what we were several years ago, but this is a rebuild that's happening as well. And we support a broad number of outreach initiatives, including social justice and advocacy programs. I think it's an understatement to in some ways put that as the last point, because I believe, and I know that that's important for so many of us, what we're doing in terms of our advocacy work, our social justice work, and our relief work. So our budget in many ways reflects those commitments. Go ahead. Some items to note about our budget. In 2023, our budget was 57% of our budget is accounted for by staff salaries. That includes administrative staff, that includes more or less service-related staff, that includes all of our clergy, our lay staff. Anybody who makes a salary is accounted in that 57%. The salaries incorporate our decisions to have full-time staff in all of our ministries: music, children, youth, family. We have 2 rectors, our deacon, and those decisions are there. And it also, go ahead. It also means that we have decided that we needed to fill our operations staff to meet the goals of what our program is. So we made a decision to fulfill our programs in those 5 areas I mentioned. At the same time, we saw that we were lacking in our operations staff to be able to account effectively, be transparent in our accounting, fulfill the needs of our audits. And in some ways, over the course of the last 3 years, we had large gaps in our operations budget, our operations staff. For instance, before Beth came, there was about a year and a half, if I'm not wrong, between the time when the last finance manager was here and Beth came. That was a large gap that needed to be rebuilt, needed to have data put back into it. Lisa spent a lot of time last year reallocating funds that hadn't been moved that should have been. And that was expensive as well, because it also required some outside services to help us get there and bring us to the point where we're doing gap-based accounting. So, but our expenses have outpaced our income in the last 5 years. Go ahead. So on the cost side, we've seen that our personnel and contract labor costs are about 8.65% on average higher year over year. Now, some of that has included the decisions to take on full-time staff in areas where we didn't previously have full-time staff, has included some sort of mandates from the diocese about how we pay our staff and the benefits that are provided that we really don't have a lot of ways around. It also includes the fact that we needed to source an outside accounting firm to do some of that work. We are currently paring down how much we're using that firm, but it was costly for us. And over the course of the last 5 years, that's been the average increase. Operational expenses not salary related are about 8.5% on average increase. Go ahead. Two items that I would like to note regarding our expenses. For the course of the last few years, we have been unable to fully fund our property reserves. So we have two property related funds that we work off of. One is our operations related, which is everything that you see that includes like cleaning and simple maintenance and everything that is like the day-to-day. Then we have our property reserve, which we fund on a year-to-year basis for the purpose of emergency capital expenditures, big ticket items that we don't necessarily budget for in the course of the year. The goal is that we hit about 3% of our asset value. So that should be about $400,000 in our property reserves, not in our operating budget for property. That means we need to be funding it at least $130,000 to $150,000 a year just to maintain that property reserves. The problem is we're going to be at about $130,000 at this year's end in that fund. So severely lower than where we need to be. The Vestry has a commitment that we get up to the required level within a year, and it's quite frankly not possible right now. We can't get up to 400,000 within the next year. There are some plans we have on how we can get there at a more accelerated rate, but it's not for this conversation right now. Go ahead. In addition, we were unable to keep our full fulfillment to the Episcopal Diocese. Now, the diocese is essentially our mother church. They do not fund us. We help fund them for everything the diocese does, and it is part of our faith commitment to the broader church, to the Episcopalian church. We fund the diocese funds the greater Episcopalian church as well. We've not been able to keep up with that to the degree that we were in the past. Go ahead. So this is the diocesan giving in the last 5 years. Our goal was to hit 10% of our budget, of our annual budget. This year we made a commitment, and it was a commitment made late in the year that we would still fund the diocese, even though we knew we were really close to being in a deficit or already in a deficit. We decided we would still fund the diocese at $50,000 this year, whereas before we were able to get above 100,000, close to the 8 to 9% range of where our pledge-based budget was at the time. Go ahead. Pledging. This is the key to our budgeting at St. John's. Go ahead. The pledge is the only means available to know what to expect from a budgeting perspective and to be able to create the realistic budget. Pledging is a discipline. It's also a spiritual discipline. It's also a commitment. We pledge to the diocese as much as we are anticipating and hoping that you will pledge to the church. Go ahead. So one of my key points today is please consider the role of St. John's in your life and the pledge that you will commit to. We will be going into the pledge season starting next week. That being said, the message today is one of where are we at financially for 2023, as much as encouraging people to remember that pledge season starts soon, and there will be further messages about that. Let me keep going though. 75% of our income comes from individuals and families who give generously to our church. On average, our pledging has grown by 5.1% every year for the past 5 years. So 8.65% versus 5.1%, you can see we are in this situation where our expenses are rapidly outrunning the growth of our income. Go ahead. The average pledge in 2023 was $4,434. Now, when I say the average pledge, that's per family, per individual, per unit, however you as a family or you as an individual give. Some families have 2 people that give. In my family, it's 1 family unit that gives. The range of those pledges went everywhere from $25 commitment for the whole year all the way up to $55,000. So you can see there's a very large range, and we all play a part in that. The other piece of our income is the Oneness Family School, and they account for about 25% of our income. Not quite, but in 2023, the amount that we can net from that income is $240,000. We are taking action because at the same time in 2024, we're going to have a new rental agreement, either with the Oneness Family School or if they decide not to, with another entity. The goal, of course, is to see that that gets raised. So here's the hard part of my message today. All right. Because of what we've committed to and to our investments in fully embracing our vision, we estimate that we will have a deficit in 2023. So we're forecasting that we're going to be about $110,000 in deficit this year. That's about 6.5% of our budget. When I look at the 6.5, I think, okay, that's not terrible. When I think about the 110,000, that feels a lot more, but that's where we're going to be probably by the end of the year. Go ahead. So we have about 3 options for dealing with deficits. We can raise it through additional giving by parishioners. We have about 264 families who have pledged in this last year. Go ahead. We can carry it into the 2024 budget and essentially be trying to work out of a hole when we start, to be honest with you. And it's important to say that because one of the commitments we're making, and I will underline it again, is that the Vestry is committed to making a balanced budget. And we're committed to making it early in the year. For the past few years, we've been carrying our budget talks into March and April because sometimes people aren't pledging till then. We really do have to make those decisions early on in the year because it has impacts on how we pay our salaries, if there are adjustments, and we really need people to pledge so that we know how to make a budget and we aren't just sort of continually going into these budget talks. The next thing we could borrow from an endowment that we have. We have three endowments and we pay service fees. We are already paying service fees on loans that were made, some of them many years ago. We are keeping up with that. So we do have that mechanism, but we actually charge ourselves market rate interest for those. And so, that also doesn't really help our operating budget if we can avoid that. So my question, my request, if you have the means, please help us close the gap. There is a giving portal through Breeze. You can send a check to the church. You can donate through the Donate Online. If you have the means to help us close the gap in this year, it would be a huge help because those 3 options we have are the options we have to lean into in January. So go ahead. And please pledge timely this year. We intend to build a balanced budget by January 10th. There's a lot going on this year. We don't have so many things happening with the 150th celebration that just our time frame for even planning these types of meetings is really constricted. At the same time, we need to know early on in the year if people are giving and what they're giving. Go ahead. And my email is seniorwarden@stjohnsnorwood.org. My telephone number is there. I'm very much welcome to talking to anybody about this, hoping that you'll also reach out to the Vestry members because they're involved in this too. And this is not just my ordeal. This is everybody's. You can expect within the next week, there will be pledge cards put out. Pledge season starts the beginning of November. So please pledge as soon as you know what that can be. So we understand some families don't really know what they can pledge until the very end of the year. Definitely, we understand that. At the same time, if you're able to pledge before the end of the year, it helps us just to be more organized and get that budget put together by the end of January or by mid-January, really. because the next weekend is the women's retreat, and the weekend after is the men's retreat, and all these things happen after that. So that's my presentation and my appeal. I definitely want to give some time for questions. And does anybody have any questions?
Good morning, I'm Cindy Anderson. I wonder what you can tell me about the endowments and the restrictions on those.
The endowments, there are 3 endowments. Help me out, guys, if I get any of this wrong. But we have the Norwood Parish Fund, which has some restrictions related. If we're going to talk about property, for instance, it is restricted to how it can help property, but there are some facets in the Norwood Parish Fund that allow, if not all of the funds that have been allocated for the year have been used, there's a portion of that that can go to property, just as well as if there are property related needs, like, say, for instance, the easy access door that we built this year was definitely something we thought this would allow for greater access for the broader community. So NPF saw that as the ability to help fund that. But NPF fund is generally for projects that are short-term in nature that help us to meet our mission of meeting the broader community, enabling the church to be a catalyst for good in the community. Talk to Jana's story if you want to know more about that. New ministries, yes. So sometimes new ministries start with NPF, and it becomes the testing ground to see if it works, if more parishioners jump on board with a new ministry, and if there's will behind that. So Nourishing Bethesda used a lot of NPF money while it was getting off the ground. And so that's one. Come As You Are service, the J2OA program all started with NPF monies. The Joyful Noise Music Fund is our music related endowment that is, for those of you who know that one better, you might be able to help me, but essentially it's for helping to build aspects of our music program that are not necessarily ongoing budgetary needs. And then the third one is the Clergy Housing Fund. Yeah, that fund was built when we sold the parish 12 years ago, the parishioner, the rectory, sold the parsonage. I was thinking of the word parsonage. I was thinking of the word parsonage. Parsonage, yeah, no. Selling the parish is another conversation. So, yeah. And that's restricted to clergy housing needs. So those are the 3 funds we have. Bill.
Yeah. So first of all, Kevin, I want to thank you for being as transparent as this presentation is in terms of what the problem is and what the situation is. And, as we all know, you can't solve a problem if you can't see it. But I have a question about the options. So it's striking to me that the options are all on the revenue side, if you will, right? And there's nothing on the cutting side or reduction side.
Right.
And so the question is, I can imagine reasons why that's not listed as an option, but I wonder if we should be more like, what is it? And I think about what are the values? What are the priorities that we have on the table that are causing us not to put that on the option list?
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that to me. So, within some of my notes, that was something I actually had thought about addressing a little more fully. As I go back to where the decisions we made on what we want to serve the church with, what types of services, what our programs are about, our music ministry, our children, youth, family, we really made those decisions within the last year in many ways to fully embrace them. And that really meant a commitment in terms of our finances on paying people full-time salaries for doing that. You could ask the question that then says, okay, have we been achieving the results? My argument in that is to say we're 1 year out of a life-changing event, and we're just at that moment where we're actually doing those evaluations. We're setting up those evaluations. How have we been achieving results? How do we measure those results? Have people been performing? I mean, this is performance management in that sense, you know, and it's a little bit hard sometimes for me to talk about when we're talking about church and matters of the heart and so forth. Are we getting to those points? And the question is, if we don't get the funding that we see as necessary for the next budget, we're going to have to make those decisions that are hard to make. And it might mean looking at, okay, are we overly staffed? You know, are we, you know, can we afford to maintain this? And those are those next discussions we're going to have. And that could be salary cuts. That could be looking at, you know, can we keep an accelerating cost of living growth the way the diocese anticipates we need to? Last year, the diocese requested that we increase everything by 5%, and then everybody was in a scaled, you know, in a scale of salaries beyond that. That was pretty hard not to take on last year, actually. This year, they've pulled that back a bit. But I know that even at the level of the diocese, the higher level income earners at the diocese are not getting an increase this year. And that's been a tough decision from their side as well. And I don't, this isn't secret news in the sense, I was told this by the canon to the ordinary a few weeks ago and said, can I use that information? So they're making those hard decisions too. Yeah, Nancy.
One of the things you haven't addressed is the budgeting for the ministries.
Mhm.
And I think people may have questions about that. We've, you know, had to cut back in the last year or so on a number of them. Our budget last year were for each of those ministries, many of them were a little bit less.
Yeah.
So people may want to know where you stand on that.
Where I stand on that is the ministries are receiving money through various sources, and I'm gonna try to parse out where I personally stand on where some of those sources should be versus what we're doing. In 2022, the amount of giving that came through Breeze that was non-budgeted funding, so people going onto Breeze and saying, I want to fund this ministry, was in excess, I'm off of memory, I think it was close to it was between $150,000 and $200,000, which was far more than it had ever been. And to a big degree, that was because of Nourishing Bethesda and the aid to Ukraine. So people were giving separately in those ways. Other sources of funding for ministries include the ministries we're committed to. So every month we have an open plate giving Sunday, where the monies that come through that are non-budgeted monies that go to ministries. What we haven't done is sort of reported on what has that money meant in terms of the overall global amount. I know that when we have one of those open plate Sundays, more people give to that Sunday than on any other Sunday. Personally, I'd love to see us do more of those. That being said, there's about 3 different areas where we see that we have to keep flexible in terms of our budget. And that becomes, what do we provide, you know, how much can we give to property in terms of the reserve? The vestry is committed. Now, there's some disagreement on past vestries on this, but the agreement, the minimum commitment can't be less than $80,000. We've not been meeting that for the last 2 years. So we've been undercutting that as well. Last year, we gave less to overall outreach ministries as a result in order to meet our budget, and then we also gave less to the diocese. So there's those 3 areas. This year, we're committed to maintaining a diocesan giving. I had several conversations last year of people who were absolutely shocked, who were long-term Episcopalians, that we would even consider not giving to the diocese. And there are people in the church who don't understand what the diocese does. So I'd love to talk about that further. But I personally want to see that we're getting closer and closer to a minimum of 10% within our outreach ministries, just like I would with diocesan. But that's the flexibility, and I can't give you a better answer. Donna?
And having been in your shoes, thank you, and Janet and all the vestry, because it is a really tough place to be. I want to just make a point that I've learned lots of places. You can't cut expense your way to profitability, right? And I know profitability isn't our thing, but it's the income that has to rise
Mhm.
in order to meet even basic expenses. So cutting expenses is not necessarily going to get, it could reduce the deficit by some, but eventually that's not how you become, who we want to be. Sustainable. Thank you for the word. I lose words now. So anyway, so I just wanted to make that point because yes, those hard decisions do have to be made, and cutting staff and those all have those trickle down effects. But eventually it's going to catch up. We're not
You're
going
right.
to catch up that way. So I just
I,
wanna make that
I
point.
agree, and I hesitate even using the words, but at the same time, we have to look at our options to come out of that, and we have to be committed to a balanced budget. Now, you can argue that in March of this year, we were very close if we weren't at a balanced budget, hoping that we would be still getting some, and we did. We got pledges through June of this year. So, and we received more pledging this year than we did last year as well. But the commitment to the balanced budget still has to be there, and at come January 10th, we're going to have to make those decisions, and it's all got to be on the table, unfortunately. Suzanne, sorry. I will say Suzanne raised her hand before the presentation even started, so.
I'm Suzanne Welch, and I'm a former senior warden, again, having sat in your shoes. I'm struck by the 150th. 150 years ago, someone decided to put a parish here, and they never knew what was going to be around it, or if it was going to grow at all, or how it would grow, or the wars that would occur, the changes in time. But I'm not a big faith speaker, but they had faith to do it. And, right now we've just come out of a pandemic. There's some uncertainty. I want to commend the leadership of this vestry in trying to figure this all out and going through this tough time, and believe that, leaders lead, but the parish has got to support. It's up to us to support what's going on to get what we believe we want St. John's to be. And so my question is, we now have a large online Zoom parish section of the parish. How is this story going to be communicated to them?
It's a great question. You promised an easy one. Well, clearly we know some of our parishioners who are online. The messaging, if we have their addresses, they will be also getting the same messaging regarding pledging that everyone else receives through Crossroads. And as long as they're participating in the services, the testimonies that will be given, those types of things. I do believe that we've recognized this year that the online community that's with us is one that we need to figure out how to engage more, but recognizing that a certain level of engagement isn't going to happen, and physically isn't going to happen. And so we need to make sure that they not only feel like they are a part of our community, because they are, but then that they receive the same requests and same encouragement that we're able to give. But definitely, that is definitely something that, as the pledge committee, we've been discussing. How are we going to incorporate not only making sure they get the messages, but even messaging to the rest of the community about the fact that they're there too, and they've become important. So.
Hi, I'm Brad Bayer. I think you've almost answered my question, but it sounds like our forecast is to end the year with a 6.5% deficit.
potentially.
Sounds like we had a balanced budget at the beginning, or close to it. So I'm curious as to what's happened
Yeah.
between March and.
Right. So a couple of things. Yeah, no.
What's,
Couple of things have happened. One is when in March, we had not yet committed to giving to the diocese. And we had said that we would. And we decided in June that we couldn't commit nearly what we had committed before, but we still put that $50,000 on as an obligation. That's one of those things. You could also go into where have the general salary increases, 57% of our budget being salaries is not over the top, but it's at the high end of what churches are generally between 45 and 60% are salary related. So in some ways, we have been experiencing this growth while undermining some other aspects, property and diocesan giving as a result. The other things that were some cost overruns that we've experienced. We had some extra work from the audit from 2021, which we needed to pay for, and it actually only got paid for in this year, from my understanding. We also have been using an outside accounting firm to help us move into a gap-based accounting. They were very hands-on at the beginning of the year, and we have since pulled away some of the obligations on a monthly obligations that they've been charging us. In some ways, Beth Campbell, our finance manager, she's taken on more of those, and on a per hour basis, it's better to have her doing that than to have an outside accounting firm. So that was a cost overrun, as well as all of the work that Beth put in to clean up what was happening last year, which in many ways happened this year. She's just put more time into it this year. So there's been some accounting overruns on that. There's been, and that came about from a big reason because we had a year and a half without a finance manager in place. And then we're recognizing the fact that we've got 10 or 11 staff members, and we're spending about $1 million on those staff members. So that's where it's all. I don't know if that answers completely your question. Revenue this year was higher, but not 5% higher over last year. It was about 1.9%.
coming in more or less that budget.
From the original, but yeah, if there would have been a deficit without the diocesan giving, it would have been closer to 50,000. Yeah.
The question from online is whether the property reserve commitment counts toward the deficit and whether that's a cash deficit or an accrual deficit. It's cash.
The property reserve, so two questions. The property reserve commitment, the commitment from the vestry by policy is that we would fund $80,000. Originally, the policy was written to be funded through the money we received from the school. And the intent at the time was that $80,000 would be added to whatever else we were giving from the budget. Is that correct? Yeah. Problem is that we've been viewing that as like the minimum requirement and not adding an above to that. So we have to be committed to that and more. It is a cash-based. Jody.
My thanks for all this information, your transparency and hard work. I don't know if this is a helpful question or not, so if it's not, please don't just defer it. But thinking about property, I know there was a needs study done, and what some churches do is have a capital campaign to address major property needs and also increase a reserve.
Yeah.
Where are we in that? Again, if it's
No,
not
it's not a difficult question. We've talked about it, and this decision we came from, and I'll try to be very transparent about this, is if you recall about a year and a half ago, we were having some listening sessions that Sari was leading, trying to figure out where the parish was going. those then led into us really trying to figure out, as we're coming out of the pandemic, who are we? There were some real questions within the parish about, are we structuring our finances correctly? Are we making the right decisions? At the same time, we're stepping into the 150th. And we started this sessions of listening this year where we knew we needed to make some changes if we were going to meet the needs of the community. And we really thought that stepping off into a capital campaign during the 150th, while trying to make changes in response to the community, would have been a bit tone deaf at that moment. And so basically we said, let's get through the 150th. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to explore who we are, to really reach out into the community and who we are, but recognize that the capital campaign is around the corner, but it's not going to happen during the 150th celebration to that degree, because it really requires a heavy degree of planning that we just don't have the bandwidth for to do that right now. And I don't think it would be right to put them together either in that sense. So, yeah.
You mentioned the renegotiation of the OFS school lease. The question is, if they do not renew, would a alternate tenant also be a school?
Could be. That's that would be probably the easiest type of tenant to put in there. Couple things about the lease. The current lease was done during the pandemic when nobody knew if the next year anybody would be in business. So there were some buffers created in that for them as well. What we need to realize is essentially two things. One, we need to get a rental income that is much closer to a market value, because we're not getting that right now. And two, they need to quite honestly participate in the utility costs and the maintenance of the lease. So those are two rather large things to try to throw on them at once. And so the negotiation this year will include a broker. We've not had a broker in the past, at least for the last one. We will include a broker, and there is some cost involved in that, but the broker also brings with them the ability to negotiate in a better way and also potentially bring in other potential clients. If they decide no, they should be letting us know, 6 months beforehand, which means we're going to, well, it probably won't be 6 months, but closer to 6 than on the dot, because they're going to have to make some moving costs. And of course, there would be some costs involved in us preparing for a new tenant. Bill.
So going to your appeal at the end, so that, I think it's pretty loud and clear in terms of there's a need, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, and I know this is probably not the pledge kickoff meeting, right? But I wonder if you could maybe just elaborate. I guess the information I'm thinking of as someone who's pledging, right, is okay. First of all, size the need, right? What are we expecting to raise? And then those commitments that we talked about, like, I think what I'm hearing, the Vestry is just really aiming for a revenue-based solution, right? So it's all going to hinge on that pledge campaign. As someone who's pledging, what would we expect to, I'll just boil it down to what are we going to get for that? Like, so what would change, or how are these really painting that vision of what those investments are going to yield in terms of the parish, I think is a question mark. And I don't know how much you can elaborate on that now, but.
Well, I think two things I'd be looking at is, where the pledge campaign is going to be focusing on is, what do we come, essentially, what do we come to church for, and what are we providing to the community in that process? So the worship experience, the training or encouraging our younger parishioners in moral living, I guess you could say. And what does that mean? What does it mean to live in a world of diversity and seek equity at the same time? And then how do we actually incorporate those things? Now, this is really the job of the people who we've tasked to manage these programs and direct these programs, and we're in some ways either looking back and evaluating, are we getting there, or trying to gather the input from the parish. how do those work with respect to the new reality we're living in? You know, can we expect that we'll ever get to 300 children in the children, youth and family program? And if so, what are we changing to get there? You know, or how are we doing it? So I would say, and this is a little bit, maybe a little bit fluffy, but it's kind of like how are our children incorporated into our relief programs or our social justice programs or our advocacy programs? Is there something that brings that and the whole family potentially together? And are we seen as a resource by the community as a result, so that people want to come? I mean, the forum this afternoon, for instance, is something that the whole community should have an interest in, and they see the church as a resource for that. And that's where we find little by little growth. So going back to something you said earlier, though, but is, you know, we're really on the end of year one. The vestry has two direct reports, and that's Sari and Chris, who report to the vestry, and they manage their programs. So they've been going through a series of evaluation of their staff with respect to what the goals are. And the next step is the vestry to evaluate them in their roles, and have they been managing their staff. So we're trying to be structured about that. At the same time, we're asking the parish, please help us fund this, because we'd hate to drop it out right now when we really might be seeing success. It's just we're not yet sure how we're seeing it. And so, yes, we need time, but we also need to allow our staff to live in those roles. Sari mentioned something the other night about how long it takes for a change to actually be implemented. Forgive me for using your example, but he was mentioning, you know, for many real groundbreaking changes, it can take up to 7 years. Well, we don't necessarily have 7 years, you know, but we have to see positive changes too. Yes, it's a revenue thing. The school will make a big difference if we can see changes there. The other aspects, it's really amount of, are people coming into the church, and are people giving, and do they know what pledging is? We have many new families to whom pledging may not be their habit, and the idea of pledging $4,000 might be like scary at this moment. That's very much understood, and that's why not everybody gives the same amount, and we all give what we can, and it's a spiritual discipline, and it's between you and God as much more than between anybody else. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
First, I want to, as a former vestry member, I know how hard this is. So thank you for doing this. One thing, as you approach the pledging season, there've been a number of really, I thought, incredible articles recently in the paper about why churches have lost people, and what is missing because of that. Community being a huge part of that. People, that tradition of community. And I think in addition to the faith part of our community, it is of our church, it's the outreach stuff that brings that community. It's the work that we're doing, it's our social things, it's rebuilding that after, I mean, I found it hard to go out after COVID, you know? So I think trying to emphasize the role of church in community and in society, I think would be useful to highlight.
Yeah, everybody should read David Brooks' article in the Atlantic from August, by the way. That is right there, hits the button right there. What is church all about, and what does church bring us that the rest of community doesn't bring us? I don't know if you asked a question there, but I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Yeah, Rick.
So just a couple of what I hope are pretty simple questions. I just want to make sure I understand the call to action that you're asking beyond the education part. As I understand it, you would like us as a parish to commit to seeing if we can close this budget deficit this year if possible.
Yes.
And one of the questions I have for you about that is, Is there a specific mechanism or outreach that's gonna happen after this for that?
No, this is the communication that says we need your help
Got it.
right now because we're going into the pledge season for 2024. Ideally, we would have had this meeting a month ago. We made some changes. The bishop came, she gave us some very interesting and worthwhile information on how to make this change. That being said, we really don't want to mix the two, but if people do have the means to help us, then by all means, please do.
Got it.
Yeah.
The second question, you mentioned that the vestry was committed to a balanced budget for
Mhm.
next year. So as I understand that, basically that means you're gonna take the pledges that you get through early January and that's it.
We
That's
have to, yeah, that we have to.
Thank you. So just following up on that, we would go to Breeze, make a contribution, and then perhaps in the memo line, right?
Breeze, yes. Yeah,
Close
yeah.
the gap or send in a
Correct.
check with a close the gap so that it's clear that it's going to this as opposed to our
Right.
2024 pledge.
Correct.
All right,
Yes.
super, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm just really impressed with this guy. Can we just give him a
Thank you.
he has a full-time job in addition to this. So Kevin, thank you. I just wanted to, if it's okay, just
Sure, sure, sure.
So just to tag on to what he just said, Bishop Mary Ann joined the vestry about a month ago, and Kevin and our junior warden Janet had a letter that was ready to go to the entire congregation, everybody, anyone whose email address we have who attends St. John's. And Bishop Mary Ann made a great point, that not all people that attend St. John's are in the same place. There are some people who are committed members, longtime members. There are others who are recent members who have said, yes, this is my home church. But then we have a lot of people who attend St. John's and they're still trying to figure out, not just is this my home church where I want to put some roots down, but do I even want to be a part of a church at all? And that sending a letter like this to everyone saying like, hey, we need to close the gap and, we need you to step forward might not be the best thing. It's not a one size fits all. So her big recommendation was that we try to reach the parish in a different way. Because what we're trying to do at St. John's is build disciples, right? Our goal is not, we need to make money so that we can keep the building open. Our ultimate goal is making disciples. And how we do that also involves, yes, the maturity of it takes all of us to make something happen. But there are some people for whom we're building discipleship that has nothing to do with money, right? We need to make sure that people know they're loved, accepted just the way they are, that there's nothing that is expected of them except to just know that this is a home for them. And so what we're doing is actually leaning on our committed members for this, right? Eventually, if we're doing things right, those who are on the periphery of our community will say, this is a place I want to put roots down and I want to become really invested here. That's why we always say that membership is not you get more. Membership at St. John's means you give more, right? And that deepens your spirituality because you feel more invested. So this appeal really is to those of you who feel like this is your church home. You want to make sure this place succeeds. And I think that, St. John's community has way more than we need to cover these expenses. It's just a matter of how important is St. John's to me when it comes to my charitable giving. And that's what we're hoping that you'll consider. Thank you.
Yeah, we have one more question from Suzanne. I do want to say though, thank you, Sari. And I do want to also just say that parishioners, come on forward, Susan. Parishioners asked us to talk more about our finances and our budgets when we had our listening sessions. It's not necessarily Sari did, thank you so much, because you help us to put some framework and vision on the totality of it. But really, as the vestry, our job is to look out for the finances and to look out for the property. And we do a lot more than that, but those are our fundamental jobs. And so that's why these forums aren't the easiest, because we're talking about the business aspect. So, yeah.
Sari said something that really triggered an idea for you to consider. And that is, some of us are ministry leaders, are like the chair of something. and our members are longstanding, are generally longstanding members. If you can give us, the ministry lead, the lay leaders, a text, a memo, something we can share with our volunteers, our standing volunteers. That way we can get it out beyond this room, and whoever is
Sure.
on
I can do
Zoom,
that.
that may be helpful. Thank you.
We can do that. We just might have to tweak what we wrote a little bit, but we're almost at 11 o'clock, so. Thank you. Roxy, did you have something you wanted to say? I see you almost raising your hand, so, okay, thank you. All right, thank you.